Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the unofficial seminar. I'm joined by Dr. Amit Ranjan, professor at NCERT, and I would like to take my colleague and comrade Amit 12 years ago to a foggy morning in Mussoorie. And Amit and I got off the bus, and we had to wait a couple of hours before we could find some civilized spot to actually rest our luggage. And I remember Amit telling me, you seem to be walking around Mussoorie like the narrator from Shadowlines. So Amit and I had both visited Mussoorie a few times before that, but obviously separately. That was the first time that we went to the city, the town, together, and we went there for a special purpose, and that was to find the grave of an Australian Indian barrister. Amit, can you tell us the name of that person?
Hi, Arup. Once again, the name of the barrister is John George Lang, which is inverted over here. Yes. The lawyer of Rani of Jhansi, amongst various other things, I think. But let me remind you, our purpose was not to find John Lang's grave, but not to find John Lang's grave. Our
Hmm.
purpose expressly was not to find it, and we were successful in our mission of not finding it. And in my multiple attempts to that graveyard, have been unsuccessful, and happily so. Otherwise, the business is finished. The business should always remain unfinished.
So we visited the Landor Cemetery, and then we went to Camel's Back Cemetery.
That's
It
right.
is John Lang's grave is it is located. We can't deny that it is not located there. It is because we have both seen pictures of it. It's in the Camel's Back Cemetery. There's also the grave of a soldier who fought in the Crimean War, and which is by Charles Dickens's poem "Charge of the Light Brigade." Is also, I think, it's engraved in one of the tombstones. Anyway, Amit, you and I stayed at Doma's Inn, which is just adjacent to Ivy Cottage, where Ruskin Bond lives. And
That's
Ruskin
right.
Bond, the nonagenarian, who's 92 years old now, he in the 1960s claimed for the first time to have discovered the grave of John Lang.
That's right.
You have written an entire book on John Lang, but you have, well, I wouldn't say that you have been unsuccessful, but you have made several almost successful visits to his grave, but you have sort of returned from there. Now we can talk about your interest in John Lang, Amit. We can talk about
My
we can,
success
uh,
overseas has always been a little better than at home. So I did go to John Lang's mother's
yeah.
grave in Sydney, as you can see in this picture, which is
Hmm.
in Ashfield Park in Sydney. When I lived there for my research on John Lang. And so that was in a single attempt, and here I think in 6 attempts I've not been able to attempt to find John Lang's grave. Similarly, I also tell that I've been to Prague, but I've never been to Prague. Also
Hmm.
been successful. Lang has written about all these places in the upper provinces, so to say.
Hmm. Hmm.
So, uh, so there are multiple things we can talk about Lang and Lang's grave and ghost stories and so on.
Hmm. Yeah. Well, there's of course Lang. John Lang is a very very interesting personality of the 19th century. The very fact that he fought the doctrine of lapse case for Rani Lakshmi Bai is a standout fact. There's also so much about the 1857 memorabilia in British consciousness that is indelibly associated with John Lang's life.
Yeah.
Thinking of the
Let me,
period of the time, the Illustrated London News, the periodical culture of Charles Dickens, Wilkie Collins. So there's so much to talk about. And John Lang was also an associate of Charles Dickens, wasn't he?
very close friend. Yeah, yeah. So let me start, since you've given me some keywords, let me start with a couple of them.
Mm.
1857, Lang wasn't in India, but his newspaper, the Mofussilite, was running from Agra and Meerut. So he was in England to further his literary career for around 5 years, 1853 to 1858. Otherwise, he lived in India most of
Mm.
his life. So in 1857, And you have to understand and appreciate the fact that Mofussilite was out and out anti-East India Company newspaper.
Mm,
Lang thrived on critiquing the military and the judiciary of East India Company
mm,
in India. And that was his bread and butter in all his careers. As a lawyer, he fought cases only of Indians against the East India Company.
mm,
As a writer, he wrote novels in which both these establishments were regularly lampooned. And as a journalist, that's what sold his newspaper. So on one occasion, Lord Harding was so irritated, frustrated with Lang writing pretty much every day against him that he summoned him and said, "What's the matter? Why do you write so much against me?" So Lang is allegedly supposed to have asked Lord Harding, "My lord, why did you come to India? Did you come to earn money?" And Lord Harding said, "Well, I'm a poor man, so of course I've come to make money." So Lang said, if the lord of Kilkiran or wherever he was the lord of is in need of money and is in poverty, imagine
mm,
the plight of a person of convict origin from Australia, how much in need of money I am. And I can make much more money by writing satire about you than writing
mm,
praises for you. So Lord Harding apparently was very pleased and invited him to be his state guest in Simla and so on for that summer. That's one of the stories associated with language. Tells a lot about him, his wit, his larrikin character. There's a term in Australian English called larrikin, which is
mm,
close to shaitan in Hindi or troublemaker, a combination of all these
mm,
um, terms. So in 1857, Lang was not in India. He was in England trying to further his literary career. And he had to be in England because copyright was a physical matter. You had to be present yourself and sign the papers for
mm,
copyright. So Lang had lost out quite a bit to what we now know as plagiarism at the hands of one Tom Taylor, who stole his play Plot and Passion in his name and called it new and original and so on. So he
mm.
had to be in England to further his literary career. And his newspaper in India was writing against the East India Company and running from within the Agra fort in 1857. So it was the British military protecting his newspaper while the newspaper was vocally against the company. So this also tells about the kind of authority and respect that the profession of journalism and the writers wielded in the mid 19th century, despite whatever their political views might have been. Very interesting that
Yeah.
150 years later in democracies across the world, I don't think journalists and writers enjoy that this kind of freedom and also a certain kind of attitude that Lang threw at Lord Harding.
Yeah, and you're saying this in an age when people have stopped reading entirely. And I was just speaking to a university professor. Well, both of us are professors as well. I'm literally a university professor, but I mean a professor at a different university and a very, and this person was my professor too. And the professor was telling me that students have written answers and they are expecting those answers to be miraculously correct, even when they are punting. So this was also an era of punting. It was also an age of the 19th century. You mentioned Tom Taylor punting and plagiarizing from John Lang. But I think it's very different from our standards of plagiarism. Although I know you mentioned a legal suit, but it was also an era when stories were getting ideas were getting trafficked, and
Yeah.
John Lang was part of a triumvirate of two people were based in Britain and Lang was based in India. The other two were Wilkie Collins and Charles Dickens.
Articles, yeah.
So, what was Lang's association with Dickens like? Any thoughts on that? Do you read it? Because you have written about this as well.
Yeah. So Henry George Keane is one of the important writers of 19th century, also a correspondent of Illustrated London News. And with who another very interesting story is associated of Lala Joti Prasad, who I have often talked about in the interviews and prominently in the book. Lala Joti Prasad was commissariat contractor who supplied provisions for the Anglo-Sikh War to the British. And instead of paying him 36 lakh rupees, they charged him with a case of forgery. And Lang was the lawyer for Lala Jyoti Prasad, and he's alleged to have come aboard a ship called Nile, which
Hmm.
I think is a complete fabrication. Lang was already in India, so to tell a good story, he fictionalized bits of his own life, so to say.
Hmm.
So I'm not going into the great details of the case, but for the first 5 days, Lang did not speak anything. The Lala thought that this is a drunk man because Lang's also self projection was of a drunk man, and that he would lose the case. Lose the case. But on the sixth day, Lang spoke and tore the prosecution to shreds. And a day before the judgment, there was a party, and at the party, Lang was asked what he thought of the jury, and he said, "The jury is a bunch of damned sewers, pigs." And so then he was challenged that. So the writer William Forbes Mitchell says that Lang was no teetotaler, and John Exshaw was the leading spirit of the day. So John Lang, inebriated on John Exshaw, claimed that the jury was a bunch of damned sewers. So he was challenged, "Can you say this to the face of the jury?" And he said, "Of course I can." And in the court next day, he said that he came aboard the Nile, on which they were served rotten stale pork. And then he pointed out to various facets of the case and said that this allegation stinks like the leg of that pig, and so on. So he called the entire jury a bunch of pigs and won the case and the bet, which was for 1,000 rupees. So as a result of which, Lala Jyoti Prasad also gifted him, along with his 10% fee, which would be 3.5 lakh in 1851. Along with that, he gave him his gold brocaded portrait. Now, in 1857, when Nana Sahib is alleged to have killed women and children, British, he became an overnight villain. And then he was the most wanted man in India. And Lang had written about the Rani of Jhansi, Nana Sahib, and various other royal figures. So Henry George Keane went to him with the hope that he would be able to help him draw a picture of Nana Sahib. And there was Lala Jyoti Prasad's portrait hanging on the wall. And he thought that perhaps this is Nana Sahib, gold brocade and everything. So there are various versions of this story. Lang is alleged to have said that the man in the portrait resembled Nana Sahib only as much as Henry resembled the Queen. Whereas Henry George Keane in his own memoir says that it was Lang's prank. And
Hmm.
therefore, this picture got printed in Illustrated London News. If you
Hmm.
can see the picture, which is Lala Jyoti Prasad,
Hmm.
and got printed as Nana Sahib. So Nana Sahib's followers were
How
distraught
do
that
we how do we verify that this is Lala Jyoti Prasad?
uh, this there's no verification, except that several writers have talked about it, including Henry George Keane, who himself had taken this portrait. And the attestation of Lala Jyoti Prasad giving his portrait to Lang is also well established. So that's how, through various accounts. Anyways, so Nana Sahib supporters were distraught that why does he have a pot belly, and so on, while Jyoti Prasad had to go into hiding. Um, all these funny stories. Lala Jyoti Prasad and John Lang later fell apart because the Lala remained pro-establishment, pro-government figure, and Lang
Hmm.
became more and more hostile to the government with time.
Hmm.
But at that point of time, they were sort of best friends. So during this time, Henry George Keane also talks about parties that used to be held, writers' parties, where all these three figures would be there, who you are talking about, Wilkie Collins, Lang, and Dickens. And interestingly, Dickens had never been to India, but he wrote a lot about India in Household Words. And it was
Hmm.
only in the 1970s that a Hawaii researcher, Anne Lawley, I think, stumbled upon the accounts book of Charles Dickens, in which he kept accounts very assiduously as to who was paid what. And that's how we know that there are 36 stories of John Lang in Household Words, many of which were republished later as part of
Okay.
his editions and
And
so on. But
were these credited to John Lang, or were these
no,
left anonymous?
because they're all anonymous. Everybody thinks it's all Charles Dickens, and which is why lots of people think that Charles Dickens visited India quite a bit. But
Hmm.
Henry George Keane also says that Dickens was a very sharp, imaginative kind of guy. So he would match Lang's stories a story for story at these drunken parties that they would have. and so he's very witty and sharp that way, which is which is what creates the confusion that Dickens visited India multiple times. Dickens never visited India, so his basically his feeder was John Lang. All of the stories that Lang either wrote in his journal or inspired by Lang's stories, what Dickens wrote himself of India. So these three are very
Yeah.
important figures of that time, but unfortunately, because Lang was treated very harshly by the critics of the time, primarily because of two reasons. The critics, British critics, generally called him a hospital bed novelist because the white man was the villain of his novels. So of course he was going to be rejected by the British critics of the time. And the other aspect of Lang's novel is his own boredom. Right? He builds the novel very beautifully for 180
Mm.
pages, and then doesn't have the perseverance to go through untying various things. So he generally kills everybody or some sort of mayhem. So it's very postmodern in that sense. His endings he quickly ends those that building of 200 pages. In the next 10 odd pages, everything finishes very fast. So that way, one has to adapt to that. It's not to say that because the conventional novel is written with an ebb and fall, that things cannot fall off the cliff. Of course, they can fall off the cliff as they do quite often.
What was this play? Will He Marry Her? Was this by Tom Taylor or was it by John
No, no,
Lang?
this
Or
is a novel.
it's a novel.
This is a novel which is very interesting, in which there's this girl called Leonora, which is also, I think, a character from Lord Byron's one of the Lord Byron's poems. Anyway,
Mm-hmm.
Leonora is half caste. She's very fair, the most beautiful girl of the time, but she's half caste of the marriage of a British officer and an Indian princess who's sable. Sable is the word used for black in the 19th century, but she is white. And this British soldier falls in love with her in England, and she says she has to come to her land, which is India. Only
Mm.
then she can marry him.
Mm.
And there she tells him this story. And his her mother is always hidden, not because um, her father is racist, but her father has an inferiority complex that the mother is a princess and he is only a soldier. Therefore, so all these. So the moment they marry, she dies and turns sable or black, and becomes an exact replica of her sister, who looks like her but is black in color. And
Mm-hmm.
so she's punished by the divine forces for marrying a white person, so to say. So basically, Lang is cracking a joke at the whole racism of the British gentry and
There's
so on.
also a short story by John Lang on
Black and blue.
Black and Blue, yes, which was then
Yeah,
also adapted by Kipling. I mean, it's rumored to have been adapted as Kim, but
not you.
I read
I
Black
mean,
and
I
Blue.
argued
I,
in my book that Kipling was very aware because Kipling acted in a John Lang play.
hmm,
Um, so
yeah.
he was very aware of who John Lang was, and Kipling is barely separated by 20, 30 years. And Lang was a very famous novelist in India, even after his death for another 50 years. Kipling was very
Mhm.
aware, and Lang was consistently writing about the plight of these half caste children. So Black and Blue is one of his most powerful stories, another Off the Cliff, which ends in Off the Cliff. Um, and the first part of Kim absolutely mirrors the plot of Black and Blue, which is
Well,
the
I mean,
marriage.
just the main premise. It's not that would be an exaggeration, but Black and Blue, I think also in Black and Blue as well, the mother is of some princely origin, is she not? The father
Not
is
in, not no 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 no. It's the opposite. The
okay,
father is of princely origin. He is a
right?
lord and an
Okay, okay.
ensign, and then he's a drunk and so on. So he has to be set right, and the priest gives him sermons that he should reform his ways and get married and so on. So then Lang says that he finds a girl who is sable, black in color, and he also here makes a distinction saying that there are many people in India who are fairer than the fairest people of Scotland and darker than the people of Congo. So he shows off his knowledge, and but he says that this girl is the blackest of them all. She is of the Bhishti caste, which is the lowest
Yeah,
caste, and she's also Muslim, so he's also aware that there's casteism even amongst the Muslim society. So he makes her the most marginalized figure, and she is responsible for his rise as a wealthy merchant and so on. Eventually, he gets waylaid and killed by the thugs, which is what I call the cliff ending. And then the thing begins with his son having blue eyes and black skin
Yeah.
and so on.
But
So what
he's not allowed to meet his mother. He's
yeah,
kept away from his mother.
yeah. So no, that is Muhammadan mother. Here's
Yes, you are right. I think I'm confusing the two stories.
because
That's
there's
also
too
the,
many
that's
stories.
also the correct line.
This was a subgenre which Lang worked on. There are at least 5 stories of
So
mixed.
so John Lang was deeply interested in India's caste scenario, was he not? He was studying the subaltern question very
Uh,
seriously.
he he was. I mean, he mixed with people, and he calls himself a Mofussilite, a small towner. So of course, he liked to mix with the people. He was running a newspaper, so he knew the inside out of society, and he
Mm-hmm.
learned Farsi and Urdu. Also translated the poetry of Sadi of Shiraz from Persian to English. So he was very deeply entrenched in the grassroots affairs of Indian society. Also, he argued in lower courts. So he knew the ins and outs, and he liked to show off his knowledge of India, and also juxtaposed with the superficial knowledge generally of the Britishers and the Europeans of India. Yeah.
I think, I mean, fascinating personality, and well, I don't know if it's a good thing that you didn't find or didn't chance on the grave of Lang in Mussoorie, or
It's a good
did
thing, trust me. Till it's
you
unfinished business,
all
there's
these?
always stories coming, new stories always coming. Um,
And there's also the story of Alice Richmond
of
of Pune.
course. Yeah,
But I don't think we have time today to go into the stories of Alice. But
yeah,
John Lang, I think, is somebody that we should return to time and again. I mean, there's so many facets of 19th century that are ingrained in that character. John Lang is somebody that I also read while writing my doctoral dissertation. We are all idlers in Mussoorie. We are all
oh,
we are all sick, or we have leave to be so. I think that's the one of the
yeah,
most
yeah,
famous lines from his wanderings
yeah.
in Hindustan.
That's
It's
where
which is
all his
after his
gossip
Himalaya
comes.
Club.
Yeah, yeah.
And
So
I mean,
a couple of things
I
that
found the Himalaya Club actually in Mussoorie, if you remember.
yeah, yeah. So did I. I think it's
Himalaya
not.
Club, but we asked people,
Yeah,
and nobody could tell us. But from John Lang's description, we could
you
find
did
Himalaya
find the
Club,
building.
and people
Yeah,
that don't even know that that building was once known as Himalaya Club.
yeah.
So that was a
There's
very
a hotel
interesting.
next to it which is called the Himalaya Club now, but that's not
Yes,
the original
that's not the
building.
original. Yeah.
But a couple of things, since we are talking about writers of Lang's time and after, a couple of very interesting anecdotes. Of course, there's my allegation on Kipling that Kim's first part is taken from Black and Blue, but also that Kipling acted in John Lang's play, Plot and Passion. And this is why the claim becomes stronger. He acted as Dismartus. And there's also an invitation card that he sent out, which I have you know, a copy of. And you'd be even more surprised to know that the first play that Bernard Shaw saw was also the same play, Plot and Passion, John Lang's play. Because Shaw's life is one of the most highly documented lives. Everything about Shaw's life is known. And so he tells that when the play ended, he refused to get up because he thought that the curtains would you know, draw again and that the players would come back. And there's an exact description in the very novel that you mentioned, Will He Marry Her, in which a kid does the exact same thing. He goes to watch a play, and after the curtains are drawn at the end, he still sits there anticipating that there's one scene more left. So there's also a series of such literary coincidences, so to say, in that.
Very uncanny. It's always going down that uncanny lane while talking to you, Amit, which is why the 19th century is full of the uncanniest incidents. Whether you look in the first half of the 19th century or the second half particularly because it is so wonderfully written with the presence of India in the British imagination, with the
Yeah.
on the one hand Wilkie Collins writing "Woman in White," on the other hand Lang writing "The Mohammedan Mother" and "Black and Blue," and so on. I think these are things that recurrent things in our conversations, and hopefully we will have many more of those. Thank you so much, Amit, for
This is
joining me.
also the we complete 5 years of this book. So you know, those who would want to read it, you can just Google John Lang and you'll get the book.
Thank you so much, Amit. Dear audience, thank you for joining us. Please like, share, and subscribe. And Amit, hope to see you very soon on another interesting theme based in the 19th century. Until then,
Thank you. Thank you so much.